Canada. It's on fire. It's getting tariffed by the two largest superpowers in the world. The government is spending like the COVID era. Canadians are legally not allowed to go fishing or on hikes anymore in parts of this country. And the job market is demanding 5 years experience and being fluent in Gujarati in order to work at Tim Hortons for minimum wage right now. I always hear from a lot of people about how their country's economy is just the worst, or how their country's economic crisis is worse than Canada's. And well, let me just show you a glorious chart right here. This is a chart from Visual Capitalist comparing real GDP per capita growth from 2014 to 2024. At the top you have Ireland, and this is a totally normal growth when you consider that Ireland decided to become essentially a tax haven for some of the largest corporations in the world during this time. Sure, this may have caused some minor issues there, but hey, at least you get to say that you're home to some of the most beloved Irish corporations like Google and Facebook, Intel, Apple, Microsoft, and Pfizer. And after them you got Poland, who is touting themselves as the beacon of hope for Europe. A little further down you got the United States, which is still growing like crazy despite its large, matured economy. And then right around the Spain and Greece mark is where people from their countries start talking about how horrible their country's economies are. Yet, these Mediterranean countries, along with their cousin Italy, they have actually done pretty well, all things considered, compared to, well, some of the other countries on this list that we're going to get to. A little bit lower is the nation who is amongst the loudest with saying how screwed their country is, and that is Australia. And then you get a little bit further, you get the UK, Germany, and Mexico, all of which are having a ton of issues right now. And all the way at the bottom, in last place by quite a margin, you have my home country, Canada. And keep in mind, this data was from before the tariffs hit this country. You know, a study out of Yale University said that out of all the tariffs from the United States, Canada will get hurt by far the most. So if you're Canadian and you think that you are at the bottom, trust me, there is still so much further that this country can go down. Now, in my past videos, I either get agreed with a lot or I get flamed for pointing out facts like how the most populated regions in Canada have become majority composed of people not born in Canada. And somehow you're not supposed to just kind of notice how your home region kind of went from looking kind of like Canada to New Delhi in the span of like 20 years. But that's besides the point. So here's Canada's updated net migration chart, and for 70 years, Canada stayed between 50,000 and 250,000 people per year. And then the Liberal government, along with a litany of corporations from small to large, all declared on the same day after COVID that they all magically had labor shortages despite having the exact same number of people in the workforce as they did 2 years before. But I know, that must have just been a giant coincidence, you know? So the government pretty much approved every single international student program, temporary foreign worker visa, and LMIA application. It's the Canadian government caving to corporations to drastically increase the workforce to take power away from the middle class's labor and ability to ask for higher wages. You see, Canada once had a law where if unemployment was above 6%, the country would not approve any new temporary foreign worker visas in this country. But the Liberal government lifted that law in 2022, and well, look what happened. Somehow every single restaurant in a populated city with high unemployment, well, they all needed temporary foreign workers because none of the few 100,000 unemployed Canadians in the Greater Toronto area could fill that job of, being a cook at Tim Hortons. And so this is an actual crazy stat. 2011, Canada's temporary foreign workers accounted for just 1.9% of Canada's private workforce. Today, that number is essentially 20%. That is a 10x increase in the amount of temporary foreign workers in our labor force. Typically, a lot of young people would go into these jobs and take being a cook at Tim Hortons or a cashier at McDonald's. But now, according to the government and these businesses, apparently there's no more people to take these jobs in this entire country. However, this is only a small slice of the issue, because Canadian corporations aren't just vastly increasing hiring temporary foreign workers. They're choosing to simply employ people abroad en masse to save money more than ever before. So in this glorious country today that we call the Great White North, take a guess. What percentage of companies right now in Canada do you think are outsourcing jobs? Give me a number. 10%? That's kind of what it used to be. Is it 25%? There is no way it's gotten to higher than 30% of companies are outsourcing their work, right? Well, that number, as it stands today, is 52.2% of companies in Canada are outsourcing work. Over half of Canadian businesses. I mean, how can the average Canadian ask for higher wages at the moment when most Canadian companies will just outsource their work to a third world country to save an extra 30% on their salary? Because, you talk to some older people, you see it online, and they do what pretty much all older groups do, and they mention how lazy the Canadian youth are these days. And so let me tell you this story here. I mean, I used to personally know multiple people who worked in the fast food industry only 15 years ago. And they were able to live on their own in a one-bedroom apartment in the Greater Toronto area, working in fast food. Now, you can't even really do a two-bedroom apartment in most cases if you were to have that same job and have split it with a roommate. So I think a large reason why some of this has happened is because Canadians cannot literally take these jobs and have a respectable standard of living. And yet you can just take a gander into job postings or go onto Reddit, and you can see that the people taking these jobs are living in near slumlord-like conditions where 6 people could share a basement. And not a furnished, nice basement. We're talking maybe a half bathroom and one giant room where everyone sleeps on the floor. And in fact, the United Nations has called Canada as a country that is using modern-day slavery. You can't make this up. This actually happened. But let me tell you what's supposed to happen instead of opening your borders, having a modern-day slave labor, printing money, taking on eternal debt. No, what's supposed to happen, historically in a thriving society, is that if businesses cannot afford to hire workers, 1, innovate, meaning you find a way to run a business with having 15 people on the payroll instead of 20. This could be through something like technology, could be through finding a more efficient way to run your business. This is something that has happened throughout history. Number 2, you have the option to pay more and hopefully more people apply to your company, and that may cut into profits. Number 3, you have the option to raise money in the hopes of running your business and expanding, and eventually you hit a point where you become profitable. Or 4th, you go bankrupt. Yet in this modern world, in Canada, we just keep caving to corporations. And that is a problem that is eroding the middle class. And the last 2 things I want to mention on this immigration part of this video is, well, everyone's favorite premier, Doug Ford, also known as the brother of Netflix star Rob Ford. May that man rest in peace. He recently was claiming that pretty much anyone who claims asylum or refugee status in Canada should immediately be put to work. And lastly, just on this topic, is, well, Mark Carney and the Liberal government stopped publishing a lot of the raw immigration data the second that he stepped into office. So it will be harder to report on this going into the future, and you can take that how you want. But now let's talk about the opposite of immigration, and that is emigration. You see, this year in 2025, it is quite likely that this will be the year where the highest amount of Canadian citizens permanently leave the country. Now think of all the issues that Canada has faced since World War II. And this year right now, this is the time when Canadians are leaving at the highest volume. And there's a lot of reasons for this. The cost of living, tariffs, the United States paying a lot more for the same job, and Canadians getting sick of having 7-month-long winters like we had this year. I mean, having a snowstorm in October last year, and then also in April this year, that was something. Canada's highest skilled workers and many business owners are actually leaving at a rate that is creating one of the largest brain drains in the whole developed world right now. And this is not really getting talked about much in the news. However, one interesting tidbit that I was forced to find out after starting my process for setting up a business overseas and leaving this country is that in Canada, if you are a Canadian business owner, if you wanted to move out of Canada and you own a corporation, a business, Canada will tax you on the capital gains of your own business as if you are selling the business. And despite that, Canadian businesses are leaving en masse. The reason being, well, for some it's the red tape, for some it's a lack of a positive economic outlook, and for others, like many digital business owners, it's the 2,000 laws that are being created every single year trying to tax, control, and complicate the lives of small business owners, while the government is trying to use those taxes and laws to prop up and subsidize the big media corporations. And you can actually see how investors and businesses are acting in this one chart. Here is the net FDI of Canada, pretty much showing how much investment is coming into Canada versus how much is leaving. And as of last year, $1 trillion more has left Canada than has come into Canada. Something that I think is really funny. I get called unpatriotic for this by a lot of people because I'm trying to set up my business in a different country, and it's largely from the, elbows up people. So the person that they voted in to become Prime Minister of this country, in Mark Carney, one of his main goals before becoming Prime Minister was to take the company that he was chairman of, which is Brookfield, aka arguably the largest company in Canada, and he took that and opened tax shelters all around the world while simultaneously moving the headquarters of that Canadian company to the United States. Even the Prime Minister, who ran arguably the largest company in Canada, has been taking his business out of Canada because he knows it's a sinking ship and he can get better returns elsewhere, while simultaneously avoiding that pesky, Canadian corporate tax. As the ancient Roman historian Tacitus may have said, taxes are for thee and not for me. And one of the last things I wanted to touch on the modern state of Canada's economy was, well, I kind of got reminded of this by seeing Gary Vee pop up on my feed for the first time in a while. Because I remember back in the day when I was a youngster in university, I was looking through all the Gary Vee content. I was getting really inspired to, start my own businesses, and, luckily it panned out. And I remember how many people around me wanted to start their own businesses, and it was kind of a really inspiring thing to see. But seeing these stats on how entrepreneurship in Canada has fallen off a cliff recently, where we have less total business owners than we did 20 years ago, despite our population increasing by 10 million people, it's quite sad. In fact, almost all of the new job creation in this country is created by public government debt. That is also a true stat. And to be honest, maybe I'll make this a whole separate video, but I do believe that the entire economic and political system of Canada needs to be drastically redone. I'm of the opinion that the pyramid-like structure for our social spending policies, other things like housing being your real retirement investment vehicle, and perpetually increasing the debt burden on the next generation, I don't think that's just how things should be. I think that a lot of the issues regarding money printing, housing, low birth rates, cost of living, open borders, a lot of these issues spawn because of the fact that the government continuously needs more and more money to support the exponentially growing spending plans that it has put in place over the last 15 to 20 years. But we'll get to that another time.